What if ancient wisdom could speak directly to your life today? Welcome to Torah from Boca, where Rabbi David Baum brings the heart of Jewish tradition to the modern world. Each week, discover powerful lessons from Torah from Boca Raton, one of the fastest-growing Jewish populations in the world. We explore stories of leadership, resilience, and compassion, and help you find meaning for every stage of your journey. Whether you're a lifelong learner or just curious, tune in and let our Torah inspire you. Listen now to Torah from Boca with Rabbi David Baum.
Shalom. So, if anyone in this room remembers Steve Jobs,
Yes.
close your eyes real quick and then tell me, open your eyes, tell me what in your mind's eye he's wearing. Black t-shirt, jeans. Black turtleneck jeans and sneakers.
And white earpods.
And for anyone who doesn't know, why did he dress like this? He dressed like this because he thought that every choice that you make drains energy from you, and therefore, if he could eliminate one small decision daily, like what I'm going to wear, he could preserve that energy for choices that he thought actually mattered. That's the reason. On Shabbat HaGadol, which we call the Great Shabbat, it was known as only the second day of the year that the rabbi spoke, which is why many of the congregants called it the Great Shabbat, because they sat in shul for a long time. Again, only the second sermon the rabbi gave. Maybe we should go back to that. No? No. Amen, right? But why? It's not the rabbi's fault. The rabbi had to teach everyone about the laws of how to kosher a kitchen, how to eliminate chametz from your homes, bitter herbs. You know, they didn't have YouTube back then. Just remember that, okay? So he needed to have a long sermon. And I imagine if I can go back in time to those sermons thousands of years ago, they were probably black and white. It was, what can I eat, what I can't eat? What should I clean, what do I not clean? Very specific. And guess what? Eliminated choices. But the days of congregants coming to shul to learn how to keep Passover are gone. Today, we come here before Pesach for different words. And I think this year, amongst many, it is, how do we make sense of the chaotic lives that we live in? Lives that don't have simple binaries like chametz and not chametz. This term chaotic lives can apply to any time, by the way, a Jew has lived on the face of this earth. But not just Jews. There was an article in the New York Times this week, living in our chaotic lives. In every generation, as Jews, we see ourselves as if we had left Egypt ourselves. Now imagine sitting at a Seder table throughout history. Maybe it's the year 300 in Babylonia. Do you think every family agreed on every viewpoint, what it means to be a Jew during difficult times? I think the better question many of you may have is, how can I prepare for the arguments I'm about to have with my family on Pesach? I'll get to that in a minute. But first I want to share an experience I had this week attending the third convening of Zionism, A New Conversation, which is a conference designed for rabbis, by rabbis across the denominational spectrum, and run and founded by the LaFell Foundation, along with other foundational partners. This year, there were twice as many rabbis as the first year, which in itself says something about a conference on Zionism, which we now call the Z word because we can't say it out loud anymore. And we had Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox Jews together speaking about a topic that's so controversial. And there were double the amount of rabbis. And what I heard was something familiar. Over this past 3 years, especially since October 7th, the past year and a half, but especially since October 7th, Many rabbis feel the constant response. They have to always respond. It's always being on the defense, responding to what's happening in Israel, responding to what's happening on college campuses, responding to anti-Semitism. But what I've seen across the country and in movements is also a battle between sides within the Jewish community. During our processing groups with rabbis, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, I learned something very interesting. There's a different fight about Israel or Jewish American identity in every single synagogue, in every movement, in every region of the United States. It just looks different in every single shul and community. In some modern Orthodox shuls, the Haredi draft issue, which I'm not going to get into, causes a lot of tension. Who supports it, who's against it? Some modern Orthodox shuls struggle about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In Reform and Conservative Judaism, we see Zionism and anti-Zionism. And yet we all sat together around this invisible table, sitting in a circle, to discuss how we are dealing with this and what are you dealing with. Some debates strengthen communities. Debate is needed in Judaism. That's what the whole Talmud is about. But if the debate gets too heated, the house can burn down. So today on Shabbat HaGadol, I want to give a message that may seem counterintuitive, but I think it'll make your table more whole. This week we read about a number of different sacrifices, but what I found very interesting was the end of our reading was the Asham offering, which immediately precedes the Zevach Shlamim or Todah offering, which is the offering of thanksgiving. The Asham means a guilt offering. It allowed our ancestors a public way to acknowledge their unintentional sins, the sins that they didn't know that they performed, but ultimately at the end of the year they feel guilty about. It was after the guilt offering, only after that, that the thanksgiving offering could then be brought. Abarbanel, who's a 15th century Spanish-Portuguese commentator, he notes that since the meat of the Todah offering had to be finished on that day, those who offered that meal, which they did as a show of thanksgiving, they survived something, they had to invite their neighbors and their family to eat and celebrate with them because they had this obligation. You have to finish it that day. And I imagine at those meals, those who would be there would say to them, "Thank you for the meal. What happened? What did you survive? What are you thankful for God?" And I believe that those types of experiences, I can imagine those conversations as being fruitful, engaging, holy. The Todah offering is actually very similar to the Pesach offering that we used to give. The Paschal lamb had to be eaten that night, which is why we invite people over for Seders. It says in the Torah, if you don't have enough people to have it, go to someone else. If you have too much food and not enough people, invite people in. And it's in those moments when we open up our homes to those who cannot afford their own Paschal lamb that you make them part of your family for just one night. But I think back to that Asham, that unintentional sin offering. I think of the times of the year when we've had arguments with each other, especially about Israel and Jewish identity, where we may have let others down. Perhaps we spoke too strongly or forcefully, and no one said anything back to us. And perhaps we weren't listening, even though we think that we're right. At the Passover Seder, not only are we forced to eat together, but we're forced to talk together. I find it fascinating that we begin the Magid, the storytelling section, with the story of the 4 children. The wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who cannot ask questions. The Seder gives instructions on how to teach each person, each individual personality to elicit a response. Because that is the point of the Seder. Without dialogue, it's just another dinner. But when you add the stories and the discussion, it becomes a Seder. But I also think there's another message here. We have a bit of the four children in each one of us. But we cleave to the labels that we are known to in the world. Robert Coles, who is a prominent child psychiatrist, author, and educator, he devoted his career to understanding children's lives and the profound impact of social environments on their development. He wrote in his book, The Call to Service, "It is tempting and at times not altogether inappropriate to sort people into a few well-chosen types. But I urge a sense of complexity of people on myself and on the reader." William Carlos Williams, the American poet, once talked of the zeal with which we take to labels of all kinds. We crave certainty. We love to put a period at the end of a sentence, and that is that. But take a look at people, he wrote, a real close look, and you'll find inconsistencies and contradictions. And that's where a closer look is needed. Not a category or a definition that tells you, that reassures you, all right, you've got it. In other words, he's saying, we can't help but label people. But guess what? None of us is really the entirety of that label. Passover is about separating categories, what's chametz and what's not. That is labels. It's cut and dry. But that's not the message of Passover. The message is actually the Paschal Lamb. The message is the Todah offering that we read today. Each one of you is a complex universe. You know that you are not simple. And if you know that, then the people around you are also complex universes, and they are not simple either. And we have to eat together at the same table at least once a year. I'll tell you something that stayed with me through my experience. It wasn't the speeches from the incredibly world-renowned speakers. It was those times sitting in circles and talking in small rooms with other rabbis from other denominations. The conversations were thoughtful, honest, and at times challenging in all the right ways. And they felt possible because there was a space that was created just for that. And that is no small thing. To sit in circles with rabbis from across denominations, from different parts of the country, with different instincts and different assumptions, and we were still able to listen, to challenge, to speak honestly, and then to walk out of the room with an even stronger relationship than we had before. Author Dara Horn, who spoke at the conference, she spoke about Jewish life as always requiring us to live in tension, to carry complexity without collapsing into something simple. She said, we're not a religion. We're not a culture. We're not an ethnicity. We're actually everything. We are a civilization, to quote Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan. And for a few days, we practiced that. We didn't resolve all the problems, or even that many, but we stayed at that invisible table in that circular space. And that is the hope that I carry with me into this week. If 150 rabbis from across the denominational spectrum in 2026 can sit at the same table and talk about Israel in 2026, I think parents and children can sit together for one Seder and walk away with the same feeling. At the end of this week's Haftarah, we heard the verse that helped give Shabbat its name. Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of the Lord. They use the word Shabbat HaGadol. He reconciles parents with children and children with parents. The great miracle of Elijah, there's no fire from heaven, no dramatic sign, but a healing of relationships between parents and children. That is the miracle that will precede the the redemption. We begin the redemption not so that everyone can think the same, it's so that we can sit at the same tables again. It's so that people that have hurt one another, misunderstood one another, or spoken past one another can still choose not to walk away, but to sit together. That is the work of the Seder. Not only to remove the chametz from our homes, but to make room in our hearts for others. Not only to tell what we think is our story, but to hear how someone else at the table tells it just a little bit differently. And perhaps that is the deeper hope of this season of Nisan, of Pesach. That if parents and children can sit at one table, then just maybe the Jewish people can sit at one table after the Seder is over. Maybe redemption begins there. Not when every argument is resolved, but when we refuse to give up on one another, when we stay in relationship with one another. Will we make room for guilt, for gratitude, for memory, for difference, and still bless God for the chance to be together no matter how chaotic our lives are? That is a Passover worth preparing for. That is a table worthy for Elijah the prophet. I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. And wish everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a happy and kosher Pesach. Amen.
If you found inspiration in today's episode of Torah from Boca, please visit Rabbi David Baum at Congregation Sha'arei Kodesh in Boca Raton. Discover more of his teachings and community work by visiting rabbidavidbaum.com. Subscribe, share, and join us again as we connect ancient wisdom to the challenges of today. Thank you for listening.